This video is sponsored by Warhammer 40,000 Tacticus. Welcome to the Painting Coach, and today I'm very excited to be painting this brand new Wolf Priest model from the new Space Wolves Army box. A huge thanks to Games Workshop for sending this out to me early. This is my absolute favourite model from the box, so without any further ado, let's get painting. So the first thing I've done is primed the model with Chaos Black spray. I've then painted all of the elements that I want to be black with AK Black. Now use whatever black that you want. This is just to make cleanup a little bit easier. The first thing we're going to do is tackle the fur and all of the leather on the model. So the colour I'm using for this is Rhinox Hide, which is a nice dark reddy brown. Now I'm going to paint all of the fur, anything that's going to be leather, like the gloves, the holster, and I'm also going to paint some of those elements that are going to be lighter colours, such as the skulls, just because it's going to make it easier to paint them later on. Once that's completely dry, I'm now going to use some Doombull Brown, and I'm going to paint the majority of the fur, but I'm not going to go all the way up to that edge of the Rhinox Hide from the previous stage, and this is where we're going to start to build that fur colour transition a little bit. The other thing I'm going to do is put the first highlight on any leather elements. So I'm going to just get a nice tight line highlight on all this, dragging the brush where I can, taking my time. Don't worry if you make a little bit of a mess here, because you can just tidy it up with some more Rhinox Hide later on. I'm then going to take a 50-50 mix of Rakarth Flesh and Doombull Brown and just add this towards the edge of the fur. Now this is kind of like a pinky brown colour. It'll all make sense in the end, so don't worry if you're not too happy with it just yet. When that's dry, I'm going to take some pure Rakarth Flesh and paint this towards the edges of all of the fur and across where I want the lightest elements to be. So I'm using this fairly sparingly. I'm not worrying about it being tidy. I'm not worrying about it being in all the recesses. I'm not worrying about the pattern being the same on either side. I'm just adding it on here. While I've got that Rakarth Flesh out, I'm also going to paint any other areas that I want to be this colour, such as the inside of the cloak and those purity seals with runes on coming down the front. Once that's completely dry, I'm going to take some Agrax Earthshade and use this to paint all over the fur elements. Now this will get into those recesses really nicely, and as it starts to dry, what you'll see is that it starts to unify that brown colour a little bit and just starts to give it a bit more of an earthy tone and blend it all together. Whilst we're waiting for that Agrax Earthshade to dry, let's have a look at this video's sponsor. I'm very excited that Warhammer 40,000 Tacticus are sponsoring this video. I've been a huge fan of the game for a number of years now, and I play it as often as I can. I really enjoy the fast-paced strategic gameplay and the huge array of champions that you can collect. Now, I'm a huge Black Templar fan, and my favourite champion is Brother Burchard, an Aggressor Sergeant. I've upgraded him to legendary status by using him in the game as much as I possibly can. I love how devastating his Bolt Storm attacks are, his Fragstorm grenade launcher, and not forgetting those two mighty power fists. There are over 80 champions to collect in the game, and more are being added all the time. You can collect Warhammer 40,000 legends like Monaeus Calgar, Abaddon the Despoiler, and perhaps relevant to this video, several Space Wolves heroes as well, including Ragnar Blackmane, Aryak Rockfist, and Niall Stormcaller. The gameplay is really simple to pick up and has layers of strategy as you decide when to deploy which unit, which special ability, at which point to try and win the day. Best of all, if you like collecting things like I do, new content is being added all of the time. And the latest faction to be unleashed are none other than the Emperor's finest, the Adeptus Custodes. In Warhammer 40,000 Tacticus, they are tough frontline units that absorb and deal a huge amount of damage. You can also collect the legendary Captain General Trajan Valoris in a special event running from the 1st of June to the 7th of June 2025. Download Warhammer 40,000 Tacticus now by using the QR code you can see on the screen, or by clicking the link you can see in the pinned comment. Use the special code Custodes before June the 7th, 2025, and you'll get a load of free in-game materials that'll help you supercharge your champions and dominate the battlefield. Once that's completely dry, and it's really important that it's completely dry, I'm just going to dry brush a little bit of Rakarth Flesh over the edges of that into those areas where you've got the Doombull Brown. And again, this is just going to help with that colour and blending it together. To finish off the fur for now, I'm going to take some Doombull Brown and I'm just going to use this to dry brush across the tops of the fur where you've got the darker colours. Again, this is just going to help pick everything out and make it more readable. If you want to get some sharper highlights, you can always go in with a brush and do some more direct edge highlighting as well. Next up, we'll finish those leather highlights, and the colour I'm going to use for this is Skrag Brown. So this is a nice bright orangey brown colour. We don't need a huge amount of it. We just want to paint some nice thin lines, and we want to paint them inside the Doombull Brown from the previous stage. I'm using a size 3 Artist Opus brush for this. It's not about the size of the brush, it's about how good the tip is. Next up, we'll paint all of the gold. Now, when I do gold on my Space Wolves, I like it to be a darker, worn gold colour, almost brass-like. So the base coat I'm going to use for all of the gold is Balthasar Gold. And I'm painting in things like the trim, that big wolf medallion across the front of his chest. I'm painting around the crozius, all those elements that are meant to be gold. If you're not sure, check the box art. Next up, we'll base all of the silver, and I'm going to use dark aluminium from Vallejo Metal Colour for this. If you haven't got that, you can use lead belcher or Surcoat silver. They're both fine for this. All we're doing is getting a good base down. There's not a huge amount of silver on the model, so we've got things like the pole for that skull icon on his backpack. We've got little bits around the model, such as the backpack vents, the mechanism on the bolt pistol. There's not a huge amount. Next, we'll add some shading to both the silver and the gold elements, and the colour I'm using for this is Nuln Oil. So we don't want to put this on too heavily. We don't want it to settle and pool heavily in any recesses. We just want to make sure that we're giving a nice little bit of a shade. So it's a fairly easy and straightforward step. Just make sure you do the gold and the silver. Once that's completely dry, we'll start highlighting the gold first, and the colour I'm going to use for this is Runelord Brass. Now, this is kind of an edge highlight, so we are looking to just catch any sharp edges we can by dragging the brush. When it comes to that left leg, the most prominent leg, it is kind of sticking out a little bit, so we will catch a little bit more light. So I'm probably just going to add a little bit more Runelord Brass around these areas, but I'm not going to go too over the top. The final brightest highlight on the gold is going to be with some Canoptek Alloy. And again, I want to use this fairly sparingly, keeping it inside the Runelord Brass from the last stage. This is the absolute brightest element, so we don't want to go too over the top. It's better to start off with a little and then add more if we need it. To highlight all of the silver, I'll just use some chrome from Vallejo Model Air. If you've got Runefang steel or shining silver, that's absolutely fine. Generally, what I'm looking to do here is just drag my brush across the sharp edges, and that gives me a nice crisp chrome highlight. So again, take your time with this, start with less, you can always add more later. I'm going to base the cloak next, and the colour I'm going to use for this is Khorne Red. So I'm going to use this to base the cloak, the hood, and also the banding that goes around the belt. So what's important here is to try not to get it into the recess of that key line that's sculpted into the cloak. If you do that, it's okay. Just put a little bit of black in it just to bring that back. But generally, get a nice even coverage across all of these areas by putting 2, maybe 3 coats down. We don't want this to be too thick. I'm also going to paint the grip on the crozius with the Khorne Red. For shading, we're going to do this 2 ways. Firstly, on that crozius grip, I'm just going to take some Nuln Oil and paint that over it. Again, we just want to shade it. We don't want to let it pool too heavily. On the cloak, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to take some Galvorbak Red, which is a very, very dark red. Now, if you haven't got this, just mix a tiny bit of black into your Khorne Red. We're just going to paint this in the recesses. And the reason this works so well is it's quite thin. So because it's quite thin, it'll blend down into the Khorne Red underneath. So as we build those layers up, we'll get a really nice transition into shadow. The first highlight that I'm going to put onto the cloak and the hood is going to be with a 50-50 mix of Khorne Red and Evil Sun Scarlet. Now, the reason I've used this mix is because it's much more vivid and gives much better contrast than just using Mephiston Red on its own. Now, I'm not looking to go massively over the top with this. I'm just looking to highlight those raised areas, those raised folds. And this means I'm going to keep the overall dark feel of the cloak. So all I'm looking to do is just paint my brush down there, and as it dries, it'll just blend down ever so slightly, and that's why that 50-50 mix is so important. Next up, we'll take pure Evil Sun Scarlet and paint this inside the lines that we drew in the last stage. Now you can see straight away this is a much brighter red colour, but because we're keeping it inside the highlight of the last stage, it really does blend down quite nicely and helps aid that transition. So we're starting to get a really nice effect on our red cloak here. I'm also going to use the Evil Sun Scarlet to start highlighting the grip on the crozius. So all I'm doing is just following the contours on the model and getting a nice crisp highlight. The last highlight is with Wild Rider Red. Now, we're going to use this very, very sparingly across the cloak. We're going to keep it inside the Evil Sun Scarlet from the previous step. And it's worth me saying that all the highlights I'm doing on the cloak, I'm also doing on the hood as well. So just use this sparingly. Good tip on your brush, very little paint, and just be very careful as you apply it. If it looks a little too orange, go back in with some Evil Sun Scarlet. I'm also going to add a tiny bit of Wild Rider Red onto the Crozier script because that's just going to help it stand out a little more. Next up, we'll paint the yellow inserts of those rune purity seals that the Wolf Priest has got. Now, I'm painting this Wolf Priest as a member of Logan's Great Company, so I'm not going to be putting yellow accents on the model. If you want to put yellow accents on the model, then make sure you paint any other elements with the Rakarth Flesh first, and then go in with Yriel Yellow. Now, this is a very thin paint, so it doesn't cover particularly well, which is why we're painting it over the Rakarth Flesh. So what I'm doing is working it into those runes, making sure it goes into those recesses, and I'm then going to go back in with a second coat to make sure I've got a nice solid colour. I'm then going to shade all of this using Reikland Fleshshade. Now I want to make sure that I focus on getting this into the recesses first and foremost. So really just hold your brush over the recesses. Don't just swipe it over quickly. Let the Reikland Fleshshade flow into them. And when it's dry, if I need to put more on, I will. Making sure it is completely dry, I'll go back in with some Yriel Yellow and just start to highlight the body of these purity seals, making sure I don't get any in the recesses. So I'm not using a huge amount of paint here because I've got hardly any on my brush. And then just to help them pop a little bit more, I'm going to take some Phalanx Yellow and do exactly the same thing, keeping it inside the Yriel Yellow of the last stage. I want to shade the inside of the cloak and the lighter areas of those purity seals next, and the colour I'm used for that is Seraphim Sepia mixed 50-50 with some contrast medium. Now, this is fairly loose in terms of it runs quite a bit, so make sure you haven't got too much on your brush. And I'm looking to just paint it into those areas and let it dry, and then start to build up that layer so I get the colour that I want. So you get a little bit of a darker transition towards the bottom of the cloak. Once that's dry, I'm going to go back in with Rakarth Flesh and tidy up any elements I need to. Also, if I painted anything else, such as those bags that the Wolf Priest has got on his waist, I'm just going to start to highlight them a little bit as well to bring some brightness back into them. I'm then going to take some Pallid Wych Flesh, hardly any on my brush, good tip. I'm going to drag this across those sharp edges. Now, this is going to give me a nice, crisp, fine highlight. I don't want it to go overboard. I don't want too much. I just wanted to make that cloak a bit more readable. Next up, we'll paint all the bone elements. So for me, I've got the icon on the middle of the belt. I've got the skull icon on the top of the backpack. I've also got the teeth around the necklace, and I've got the skull of the Crozier's Arcanum as well. So I'm using some Ushabti Bone for this. I will need 2 coats to get a nice even coverage. I'll then wash all these elements using some Agrax Earthshade. Again, not putting it on too heavily, focusing it on the recesses and making sure that it doesn't pool too heavily. Once that's completely dry, I'll go in and highlight all these elements. Now, the colour I'm using for this is Screaming Skull, which is a nice bright bone colour. And all I'm looking to do is catch the most raised edges and those edges facing upwards, leaving the darker colours in the recesses. Now, this is quite a jump in contrast with some of the darker Agrax areas, but that's what makes it work. And it just also cuts out a stage of not having to go back in with the Ushabti Bone. So just take your time, work your way around, and sometimes you can drag your brush across sharp elements as well to get that nice crisp highlight. I'm going to paint the head of the Wolf Priest next, and the first thing I'm going to do is base all of that with Kislev Flesh. Now, this does need 2 or 3 coats in some areas. Just be careful around bits you finish like the hood, but don't worry if you do get some on the beard. I'm then going to wash the features using Reikland Fleshshade. Now, I'm not going to wash the whole head, so I'm just focusing this on the eyes, the nose, around the edges of the beard and through the brow as well, where we've got some sculpted detail, just to make him look a little bit older. I'm then going to go back in with Kislev Flesh and start to highlight up, making sure the Reikland Fleshshade is dry. What I'm looking to do here is just pick out those sharp edges, such as the cheekbones, the nose, the brow, the top of the head as well, and also paint in and highlight that forehead area where he's got that frown. Again, that just helps add an aged look to the model. The final highlight on the skin is going to be with some Flayed One Flesh, and this is going to be a much more refined highlight, focusing on exactly the same areas we painted in the last stage. However, we just want to keep it inside the Kislev Flesh. So again, we're looking at the brow, the nose, and the cheekbones, and also those furrows on the forehead. Next up, we'll paint the beard, and I'm going to base this using Eshin Grey, which is a nice dark grey. So just take your time, be careful around the face, but don't worry about painting right up to the face because we do need to do that. I'm also going to paint that braid of hair coming down the side of his head as well. Next, we'll go in with some Dawnstone. What we're looking to do now is start to build up some of the volume of that beard, looking to catch some of the strands, leaving the Eshin Grey in the recesses. So you see I've not got much on my brush. Very good tip, and I'm just looking to catch those strands. For some of them, you can drag the brush to get a nice crisp highlight, but for some of them, you just will need to carefully paint them on. The last step on the beard is to take some Administratum Grey, and exactly the same things we did in the last step, except we're going to keep this inside the Dawnstone. So again, not much on my brush, just looking to catch those lines, those sharp sculpted elements of the beard, and that's going to give me a really nice grey beard effect to make this Wolf Priest look old and distinguished. Moving on to the gemstones the Wolf Priest has got on his gauntlet and also on his backpack. We're going to firstly base these using AK white. Now you can use whatever white you've got, it doesn't matter. We'll then cover them using some Baal Red contrast paint. This will give us a nice bright red colour. And we'll highlight them using a mix of Baal Red and white, so we've got a nice bright pink. And we're just going to tap this on the top of the runes to give them a nice glow and shine. We'll move on to the black armor next, and if you haven't already done this, go back in with the AK black or whatever black you use and just tidy up any mistakes you've made. The first colour I'm going to use to highlight is going to be Dark Reaper. Now, this is a fairly chunky highlight in some areas, but if it does go too chunky like it does for me in some places, I just tidy it up with AK black. Generally, this doesn't cover fantastically well, which is great because as it dries, it blends down, which just helps that highlight transition. So just work your way around the model, getting this into all the areas that you need to. Keeping in mind which areas are facing upwards, the shape of the model as well. So for example, on the backpack exhaust, that's round, so you'd probably paint more of an area across there, and also dragging it across those sharp edges to get the crisp highlight. The next highlight is with Thunderhawk Blue, and again, what we're looking to do is keep this inside the Dark Reaper from the previous stage. This is a nice, easy and straightforward step, really, so just take your time and enjoy it. I actually did really enjoy this stage because it just shows the model coming together really, really nicely. Again, make sure you haven't got too much on your brush. Take your time and add a little to start with. You can always go back in and add more later on if you need to. The final highlight on the armor is going to be with some Fenrisian Grey. What else? And we really do need to use this very, very sparingly because it is a very powerful and is much brighter than all the other colours that we've used so far. So what we're looking to do is just some dot highlights across the sharpest elements of the model, and this will just give your armor a nice little bit of a pop. If you do put too much on, you can always go back in with the previous colours just to cover over them a little bit. The last thing to do is to paint all of the runes that the model has got. So the first thing we'll do is base all of these using Dawnstone. So we've got one on the belt, we've got a couple on the backpack, and just check there aren't any other across the model as well. We'll then wash those using some Agrax Earthshade. So make sure it goes into the recesses and actually flows into the runes as well, because this is just going to give that better definition. We'll then highlight these using some Administratum Grey, making sure that we've got a nice crisp highlight. So as you can see, I've not got much on the brush. I'm just dragging it across those edges to get that nice fine highlight. And there we go. This Wolf Priest is done and ready to lead the warriors of Fenris into battle. I'm really chuffed with how he turned out. I'm really happy with the cloak. I'm really happy with the armor, those yellow elements, and also the beard. So I really hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you check out all of my other Space Wolves content. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you download Warhammer 40,000 Tacticus now by scanning the QR code on the screen and use code CUSTODIES to supercharge your champions.